Thank you, Beatriz, and thank you, Professor Willis. We're now going to move into the Q&A part of the presentation. So I'm going to move the screen a little bit. There we go. Okay, so people can see it now. Hi. Does anybody have any questions either for Professor Willis or Beatriz? While they are, does anybody have a question for them? If not, can I start? Oh, there's a question here. I'll take mine later.
I have a question for Beatriz. Can you hear me?
Can you hear me?
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
I can do it. All right. No, so I have a question. When you mentioned the black ethnic educator, what exactly do you mean by that?
Oh, within the national educational policy, there is this acknowledging of ethnic education as the education that is imparted to cultural groups of people who live under their own, reservations and their own legislation. The way to solve the ethnic education as education based on their their groups of people, ways of knowing and living, is to have ethnic educators. Usually, those in the reservations, the ethnic educator is a teacher who is from their own community, and there are programs like licenciatura in ethnic education. So in Cali, the teachers, any teacher, like there are two ways to become an ethnic educator. You can study the licenciatura in ethnic education, 5 years, and you have the degree, or you study any licenciatura like literature, philosophy, whatever, and then you take a 6-month course to take the content and understand how to teach that content or how to manage that content with ethnic groups, and you can work as an ethnic educator. Usually, ethnic educators are to be worked in these rural towns, but due to the migration of Black people to the city of Cali, the Secretary of Education in the city has allowed to have ethnic educators in the city. And based on the population of Black or indigenous people, they can apply for the job to be a Black ethnic educator or indigenous ethnic educator. And in Aguablanca has been acknowledged as having high Black population. They are having now migration from people from indigenous groups from Cauca and Nariño. So they are now opening positions for having indigenous ethnic educators. The teacher I observed is Black ethnic educator, but he saw, because he did the 6-month training, special training. He didn't study the licenciatura, he studied biology and chemistry. And yeah, does that answer the question? Okay. In Spanish, etnoeducadores.
Are there any other questions? Then I'm going to jump. As I was listening to you, Frank, will get this, and I'm sure Professor Willis would argue back and forth. There were two things that struck me as very interesting. One, when you talk about this liberal education background, I actually had presentation, and I'll explain to you why. Professor Willis, because she knows why. But there seems to be a very similar, very analogous discourse between the liberal frame and the ideas of cultural literacy, espoused by people like Hirsch and others. And that, I mean, that should be, that could be, so when we talk about this idea about they have to learn the anthems and they have to wear the uniforms, I didn't remember the book Cultural Literacy, What Every American Should Know. And there seems to be, that should be an interesting point of convergence, that the liberal frame is not so devoid of the larger conversation. It is not so just into critical literacy. The other thing, and we talked about this new problem, when you say that literacy in schooling solve inequity problems, and at some point you made reference to Barton and Hamilton Street, and yet I haven't seen any references to the autonomous model. But the autonomous model of literacy actually says literacy in schooling solve inequity problems. So in a way, they cannot problematize. They say that the solution to the problems is just throwing literacy into the equation. And I was like, that just, personally, I love this study. I haven't really heard any dissertation, but I found some things that since you bring up other authors outside of the literacy, the critical literacy framework, at some point, whether in dissertation or beyond dissertation, it might be useful to connect those dots. That's it. That's all I got.
I didn't hear you like quite clear, but I think that you said that the liberal racial frame had ideas that were similar to the autonomous.
No, I said that the liberal frame leads in that idea of, when you talk about the data, you say that these teachers, the principal says that they really need to learn the anthems and they really need to wear the uniform because that makes them better, or that kind of thing, because the elites don't want them to learn that because that makes you bad citizens. When I heard that, I remember some of the principles of cultural literacy where they say there is a certain set of values and a certain set of norms and a certain set of things that you need to know in order to be a good citizen. So as I said, that's why it looked very similar to the principles of cultural literacy as people like Hirsch and some people around the hill have sorted out time again. That is more conservative actually, you that are liberal, you were going to kind of play with semantics.
When reading and analyzing this data, I realized how much the liberal, not only this racial frame, but liberal political position shows it as being neutral, but it's not. It disregards the needs of the discriminated groups. And in this case, the principal seen as a very democratic man. When he was walking in the school, he told the students, he was very calm down, and he said, hey guys, it's better not to sit on the stairs because people are passing by. But he was basically privileging the collective rights over everything else. And that everything else includes racial groups too, that have their own needs for vindication. So basically, the legal frame is erasing the needs of the racial groups in this case, because they are worried with the needs of they are more focused on social classes and not in racial groups. And they take the problem as being the problem of the proletariat, but not the working class, and not being the issue with race. So they understand that democracy and participation and we are all equal solves everything. When what I saw, for instance, in the families is that basically they say we don't have the right to be equal. We just want to question the system that marks us out, and that doesn't allow us to participate. We don't have the right to be equal. We want to be able to question the system, the social system. So the liberal racial frame does not address the needs of, in this case, black groups in the city. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you. I was making a comment, elaborating, expanding the framework. Not that I agree with you completely. That one of the problems with that particular frame is how it tends to whitewash some elements of the curriculum, and even the presence of certain racial minorities or certain groups or ethnicities in the curriculum. Because we really want to build a unified country, which ultimately seems to be the goal. We want to build this unified country where we can supersede and we can transcend those minutiae we call race or ethnicity. And we realize in this mention how problematic that is when it comes to acknowledging the current realities and the moments of marginalization that happens every day. I really like the framework, and I really want to read the dissertation was complete. Sorry. Did I start the court? Oops. I think I struck gold.
No, just kidding.
She's only taken twice, that time yet.
Professor Willis, I know that no big interest. My grad students get that all the time, and I ask about the defense. I know that. Are there any questions for either or? I don't know.
Good evening, Professor Willis. I was wondering, when you speak about black and brown, what do you exactly refer to by brown? Is that the Latino community or?
Sure. In general, in the U.S., there's so many ways, just like in Latin America, to refer to people of color. So the current term is minoritized youth, because people have placed on them the notion of being a minority, when in many places they may be the majority. So black and brown is another way of saying the kids who are of African descent, the kids who are not white and brown in skin color. They could be brown skin color and be Latino, they could be Native American, they could be mixed race, but identifying as part of either the Latino community, the African American community, the Middle Eastern community, which is a very growing community in the United States. They're, in general, not as vocal about issues of race.
So now, between, from both perspectives, like both in Colombia and both in the States, I think that the issues are very similar in both places as far as being, as far as this, I say minorities or ethnic groups are treated. And when we speak about differences or equality, how, what's better? I mean, do we accept that there are some differences? I mean, there are, evident differences, but so I don't, what's the better way? Because I mean, if we have ethnic teachers that are educated in specific ethnic subjects, I don't know, to teach in this particular schools in this particular neighborhoods. So is that really the answer? Is that better? What do you think about that? Because I mean, the government, like she was mentioning before, they're in our laws by law for certain like indigenous and ethnic communities, the government has to provide teachers that are qualified to teach in this community. So is that the answer? Is that a step in the right direction?
In my way of thinking, a step in the right direction is all people would have a critical frame and have a more accurate understanding of their history. So whether they are in Latin America or South America or in the U.S., the notion of history has to be broader and beyond the dominant view. And once it moves beyond the dominant view, people will be able to see that there are multiple histories as opposed to a history. Earlier, Raul made a reference to the notion of cultural literacy and the work of E.D. Hirsch. And it came under strong backfire because it only promotes a dominant view. And in the U.S., that dominant view means that it's a white view, if you will. It's white and white, right and good and perfect, and everybody else needs to try to aspire to be white. And as Beatrice's work shows, children, even when they can't articulate that, fight against it because it diminishes who you are in your sense of personhood. So in response to your question, I can only tell you of my experiences in Brazil, because I haven't been to Colombia, and I found it very stressful that people would ignore the fact that there were racial differences. They would pretend as if there were no racial differences, when it was very clear to me that the people who were, the majority of people who were poor were black. But they would talk about issues of poverty, but not issues of race. And with the notion of intersectionality, it goes together. Now, I would not be considered a poor black person in the United States, but I always am a black person, no matter what. I don't find that problematic, but I know for some people it is problematic. In Brazil, you are just a person, theoretically, but in actuality, the poor people were always black. So not every poor person was black, but nearly every black person was poor. But there was actually no recognition of that. No discussion, no open discussion. So I'm not saying it's better or worse. I'm saying it is what it is. And how can we move to a more inclusive environment so everybody can have be a part of that conversation?
Okay, one quick clarification on that. You haven't been to Colombia yet. Not we are going to work on that, but we'll get to work on that. Because it's time to start in this end, because they have histories on class at 7 p.m. in the meantime to eat something. I'm just going to throw one final question. And this is going to be a question. For those of you, the snarky ones in my class, that I'll see you tomorrow at 11.
Yeah.
The snarky ones, yes. There is a question here. Some of the students, and the question is the beginning. Some of the students here, I have at least there is one or two. Well, one is working on her master's thesis in curricular literacy, and a couple of them have expressed an interest in using curricular literacy as a framework for her research. So the question here is, from your experience, as well as your experience with this, what things should a beginning scholar who wants to get involved in curricular literacy keep in mind as they are framing their research?
My response may differ from Beatriz, but as I started with critical theory, it is troubling to me as a researcher when I read about critical whatever, and people ignore the foundation of the theory. That is problematic. It is not good enough to simply talk about it like you know about it if you cannot prove to me that you've read some of the very basic writings, the foundations of the theory. Otherwise, you're just running your mouth. So I would say, if anything, you read and I'm not saying you have to go and read the German version of it, but you need to read the foundation. You need to understand what Marx says, what Gramsci says, before you can begin to try to critique what other people are saying, if you're going to be a critical theorist. Beatrice.
I think that a good idea is to be aware of your position in the world and in the study, or in your academic endeavor. In Colombia, it's not common to talk about race, as Professor Willis said. You see, poor people are not coincidentally black people, but they don't talk about that. So if you acknowledge your position of privilege, any type of privilege, to address any research or teaching endeavor you are going to do under a critical theory's view, that helps a lot to relate with people, to understand things, to acknowledge your own position in the field, and to have, in general, a more, I would say, honest and respectful view towards yourself and others.
Nice job.
Good job. So I think we can express our gratitude to Professor Willis and to Beatriz, whose research I hadn't really heard much from, and I'm really, really impressed by the quality of your work, Beatriz. You're doing a wonderful job, and definitely you're going to be making a big difference in the field of critical literacy in Colombia when you return. So I think we should give him a hand. Again, with the expression of our gratitude. Oh, excuse me. Sorry. Okay. And apparently there is one more question, so we're gonna open the room for that question.
Good night. Good evening this morning. So, my question is, what idea do you have? Do you give up the black teachers to improve the curriculums in the regions according to the literacy? What idea? Could you give us to black teachers to improve the curriculums in our region? Because, for example, black teacher, I from Chocó, yeah? You were talking about the last persons had a little opportunity to study, to advance in many words, yeah? What do you give us idea to improve these curriculums in our regions?
The question is if ideas to improve the curriculum in the
To improve the curriculums in our regions according to the literacy.
with the okay, in the towns, in rural towns, or in the city, or
It's a town.
in a town? Okay. I think that in general, the very first thing is to acknowledge race in the school, in the town, in how it works in the curriculum and how you want to address that. In this regard, particularly to literacy too. The problem is that in Colombia there is no national policy on literacy. Literacy is related to libraries and to culture, the Ministry of Culture, and they have promoting reading programs and all the activities done by libraries. In the school, there is language and lengua castellana, like Spanish language and literature, but there's no literacy per se. So the situation is that literacy is seen through the eyes of the Spanish language and literature curriculum and guidelines. And the view of literacy under this frame is permeated by all the construction of literature as the work of a male-dominated mestizo man in Colombia. The view of Spanish is how usually Spanish is taught is very grammar-based and alphabetic oriented. So the very first thing would be to start to question how the national guidelines and the design the lineamientos curriculares for Spanish language and literature, and even for social studies and all other subjects, are constructing literacy as the literacy of certain group, and not the literacies of different groups, and acknowledging that literacy can be used also for resisting oppression. The way policy in Colombia addresses this is problematic. I insist that the term in Colombia, the way to address this is based on the idea of ethnicity, and although it may be more appropriate for people in towns, it promotes the idea that cultures are static, that cultures don't move, and these represent issues for the mobility of Black people or indigenous people throughout the country, and even for the identity, because in my fieldwork I have people saying, well, I'm Black, but I'm not that, and and that is, I can hear that music, I do that and salsa, I don't do that, which is supposed to be for Black people. So in towns, it would be necessary to analyze the practices, and what a good idea is to have what more like Gonzalez talk about plans of knowledge and how teachers can be ethnographers of their own communities and try to analyze those that knowledge, and in this case the literacy practices in the classroom with reflection view of those practices to take students to think critically about how they exist in the town, in the country, following Freire's idea of how they have existed, how they exist, and how they want to exist in the future.
Thank you very much.
That's a very, I think that's a very good way to bookend it. Once again, Beatriz, my gratitude for your time, your wisdom, your experience, and research. Once again, thank you.